Hello, welcome to Trace Neuroanalytics, episode 3. My name is Nikki, and thank you to James Kroll at Bay Area Peak Performance for submitting this EEG. This is a guy in his early mid-20s who is looking for help with his ADD symptoms. And I haven't taken a look at this EEG yet. If you're interested in a report like this yourself, you can head on over to traceneuro.co, and thanks for watching. So, when we look at the background activity, right from the start, we can see that F8, the area on the right temple, has a decent amount of high-frequency content, which is likely EMG. And I'm also noticing some of these sharp waves that are phase inverted front to back. Already there's kind of a couple of them in the first 10 seconds here. And as far as the background rhythmicity is concerned, we see some alpha activity towards the back of the head that is kind of coming in fits and spurts and also somewhat projecting to the front of the head. And we also see some slower stuff up front, right? So if we look at F4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hertz, there's some stuff going on in the front of the head that's on the slow side. Right now we're in average reference, and we have not done any artifacting yet. So we're going to scroll through and just notice what we see before we get into the ICA artifacting procedure. This EEG was recorded at peak brain, and it seems like the eyes open recording is quite short, so we will do what we can with it. Otherwise, it seems like a decent recording so far. And the main thing I'm noticing is a lot of drowsing. You can see we have these bursts of alpha followed by a reduction in the background band power, followed by more bursts of alpha, and then these occasional single kind of sharp features that go front to back. So this coming in and out of alpha predominance with the eyes open is a signal that there may be some vigilance instability. Right here we have alpha predominant kind of at the back of the head and starting to get spiky. And then we have a different alphoid feature, which is more lateralized. It's phase inverted from left to right. If I drag T7 to P7, they're in phase. To P8 to T8, it's out of phase. So that's kind of interesting. Right? There's different aspects to the thalamus that generate different kinds of alpha. That one would be a more temporal alpha. Wow, and we are already at the end. So very brief recording, and by the end, it looks like the left side is also lighting up with some EMG. We're seeing it at F7 and T7 now, whereas previously we were only seeing at F8. So I just right-clicked at the end at the top here, and I'm left-clicking on the left bound to make a selection for the ICA artifact rejection. And I am turning off the PCA denoising. And we'll run the algorithm, and it did not take very long at all because it's a very short record. And our hope is that we're going to be able to isolate the components that we're actually interested in, which it seems like are only really the EMG. The kind of petri dish appearance of these different components is not encouraging to me. So I'm going to work a little magic and turn up the low cut, and I'm also going to switch over to the TON algorithm and hope that that gives us a little bit more of a granular breakdown of the different EEG components that we're interested in. The first one we're interested in is F8, and that doesn't do a very good job. And I'm going to try Infomax, see if that's any better. So part of the difficulty of working with such a short recording is that there's less data on which the spatial filter blind source separation algorithm can be trained on. So right now we're trying to pull out the EMG from F8, and you can see it's pulling out some of this real rhythmic activity. So this is less than ideal. I'm going to turn the high cut up and drop the low cut back down and see if that makes this any better. After that, I'm going to stop playing around with the algorithm and just do the best that we can. So that's doing a decent job of removing the EMG. And let's see if there's anything else that we need to grab, right? So keeping an eye out that we haven't removed real cortical activity in the excluded artifacts. At this point, we're seeing that our T7 cleaning still leaves something to be desired. And we now have 4 components selected, and this corrected EEG looks basically cleaner than what came before it. There's not a component for this pop that's happening right here, so we'll have to manually pull that out. And we're scrolling towards the end where there was more EMG in the temporals. We still see a little bit left, but it is, in my view, an acceptable amount. And there probably isn't going to be another component that really helps us here. So we're going to call that good enough. And now we can start to scroll through and pull out some screenshots for our report. So this kind of sharp activity right here could be a somatosensory event-related potential. I'm going to drop in the low cut again to kind of smooth things out. And we don't have a whole lot to work with as far as raw data, but I like to get at least a handful of screenshots just to kind of show what's going on. And I feel like this is as good a section as any to show that we have this alpha drowsing followed by dropout. So we're going to put this into the eyes open raw data. And this is indicative of vigilance instability. So this is an example right here of something which could be a somatosensory ERP, although we don't really know. It could also be alpha, right? The ERPs are in the alpha range. Right? There's a poor sense of differentiation between the front and the back. We do see a little more alpha at the back of the head, but in this eyes open recording, everything's kind of moving in lockstep, which is not a good sign for cortical functional dynamics. Here's an interesting burst of some faster activity, followed by a separate alpha generator that is temporal. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this. More alpha drowsing with independent temporal alpha generator. And that's visible right there. And here we are nearing the end of the recording. I really don't know why someone would record such a short EEG when you've done all the work of capping someone. So if you're at Peak Brain LA, take note. The standard is 10 minutes, eyes open, and 10 minutes, eyes closed. And a recording this short, if it were to go to med legal, which is highly unlikely, would be potentially a liability. Interesting that, again, this is alpha starting to get spikier here. So, not a whole lot of new features, but just for the sake of thoroughness, we're going to take a third screenshot. And we'll say that alpha adopts a sharper appearance towards the end of very brief recording. Okay, so let's take a look at the spectra. And this is not a surprise, right? So the general appearance of there being not a whole lot of differentiation, kind of alpha alpha everywhere, is basically what we saw. I'm also not surprised by how kind of jagged the spectral composition looks, because it's a short file, and we also saw that the alpha was drifting around, which is another indicator of vigilance instability issues potentially. So what do we pick out from this when it's so jagged? Well, hard to say. I mean, we could pick out, earlier on I noted that there was some of this frontal kind of slowing activity, so we could generate a map for that. And we can generate a map for the slower edge of alpha. Looks like that's a pretty consistent feature around 9 hertz. And then we can pick up this faster edge as well, which is closer to 10. And is there anything else that we really want to grab? There's not a whole lot of significant peaks in the beta range. It's sort of just disorganized beta. So we can take a quick look at the average EEG coherence, and nothing really jumps out. It's not really a valid assessment with this little data. So yeah, there's a right posterior dominance to the alpha activity. And we're going to generate our print preview here. The first time we do this, it's always kind of slow. And as a reminder, if you are interested in one of these yourself, you can head on over to traceneuro.co. And if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can do so at eegworlds.com. And I'm excited to get more people on board the Trace Neuroanalytics train. I've been enjoying analyzing these EEGs, and folks have mentioned how much they value having different sets of eyes on their data, including those of a unofficial, unpasteurized technician like myself. So this is our spectral graph with the maps generated at the bottom, just for the main kind of features here. Right, I could have generated a map for the stuff in the delta range, but with the recording this short, I tend not to trust what's showing up there as much. And what do we say about this alpha peak? Or rather, this spectral distribution. Dual alpha peak suggests possible vigilance instability, lack of frontal alpha blocking may be associated with impaired attention. Slower alpha tuning may be associated with reduced arousal, right? Nothing crazy. Let's go on to the eyes closed, even though we were kind of left hanging on the eyes open. And what do we see? Well, no surprise, a lot of drowsing. And we still see some of the EMG activity at T8. And we're not scaled super high, but we are seeing just lots of alpha. And it's coming and going, coming in fits and starts. And it's a relatively clean recording. And yeah, a little bit of lateral eye movement potentially, looking at F7, T8 there for a moment. But in general, we're not seeing a ton of artifacts so far. Dropout followed by some slowing. And CZ is now showing a little bit of vertex activity. So we have alpha drowsing, and now we see this bigger wave and slow, right, in the sort of delta range. So that's a sign that they're going into a deeper stage of sleep. And that's to be expected after we see a certain amount of alpha drowsing followed by background dropouts. We'll start to see vertex activity. Now there's re-alerting, and we're keeping our eye on CZ to see if there are further instances of vertex activity. C3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This could be mu here. Doesn't quite look sharp enough to definitively be mu. I suppose it could also be sleep spindly type stuff, but vertex sharp wave at 203. And this is one we may not even need a whole lot of cleaning up on. So I'm going to zoom past this so that we don't go through the entire thing twice, since this one's a longer recording. And we're going to see if we can pull out any of the eyelid flutter and lateral eye movements and EMG. And then we'll go back through again and extract our salient fragments. So T8, again, I'm not inspired by these topographies. T7 and T8, nope. Will the ton give us a better decomposition? That's a great one for T7. Will we find something similar for T8? So this is an instance in which we start to become skeptical, and it's frustrating. So you can see what's happening here. This is effectively reducing the EMG at T8, but then it's, for whatever reason, inserting it into the rest of the channels more so than it was there before. So the spatial filter is misbehaving. And, the question we ask is, well, is it better than it was before? I don't know. It's frustrating when these things don't do exactly what we want them to, but we're going to keep trying. We're going to scroll back to an area where the EMG was more substantial. So here's a good example. Do any of these components really get it out? Ugh, not really. Sometimes adding PCA just denoising helps. I mean, rarely, but sometimes. And yeah, I don't know. We may be stumped on getting it out with this one. So we're just going to take it as it is and identify the main features that we've already seen and grab some screenshots of them and then pull out any zones where we really need to eliminate the EMG. Um, and the EMG is something that we'll see in the spectra, but we can sort of just read around. So I'm not super worried about it. The beginning is an interesting one to screenshot because already we're seeing it at full alpha dropout only 16 seconds in. So that's a sign that there's a decent amount of drowsing. Now we're assuming that the recording started exactly when the person closed their eyes, and we don't know that. But as a reminder, it's a good idea to start the recording right before the person closes their eyes, and then you get to see that initial alpha squeak, and you get to know that there's not additional drowsing basically front loaded into their state when we start doing the recording. So right now I'm scanning for any more new and interesting features, as well as when the vertex activity starts. And this was the zone that we identified earlier. Alpha drowsing with vertex activity. And look, more of the same. Alpha drowsing with vertex sharp wave now. As you can see, it's propagating more throughout the head. So this is a more proper vertex sharp wave, although it's not huge. And let's see what else we find, right? So we do want to look at the whole thing with kind of a fine-tooth comb because in the eyes closed, we're more likely to witness paroxysmal activity because those instabilities happen more frequently during state changes, which, as we can see, there is plenty of state change here. So we don't want to scroll through too quickly, even though we may be seeing lots and lots of similar features kind of repeated over and over again. Drop out of the algorithm, and here it comes back. So, this person has spent the majority of this whole time in stage A2 sleep, in A3. And now we're at more of a dropout and back to vertex activity. So I think this is as good a fragment as any. Well, no. I'd like to grab another one where we have alpha dropout followed by vertex activity. So here we go. Alpha drowsing followed by vertex activity. Ta-da! And let's take a look at the spectra. And we have a sense of what we're going to find. Imagine that. So it is a little slow at 9.28. Is there anything else for us to pluck out? Not really. We can pick out this here if we want to. And we could look at the coherence. It's not insanely high, but it is high. So let's copy pasta this into our report and come up with some thoughts about this distribution that we see here. I'm going to make this a little smaller for my own eyes. Lack of cortical dynamics is most of what we can say, although we do see that they go into different stages of sleepiness. There's not a lot that we can tell other than that the alpha is kind of standing up at P8 and not really at PZ. So what does that mean? Well, use your clinical judgment, but oftentimes we like to see alpha the biggest at PZ and then decreasing in the surrounding areas. So something like this may represent not the best distribution for alpha as far as sensory processing is concerned. And it's slow. So yeah, if this guy's in his mid-20s, then we could certainly see that that would leave something to be desired. So slow alpha tuning with excessive drowsiness may lead to inattention. Few notable features aside from global alpha. Lack of frontal engagement may contribute to symptoms associated with ADHD. Improving sleep is necessary for differential assessment of attention function. Recommendations: audiovisual entrainment for improving sleep quality, SMR, neurofeedback, CZ to either of the temporals. Sleep study to rule out. Oh, my webcam just died. Why did that happen? Sleep study to rule out apnea. Sleep hygiene coaching. Frontal CES to encourage frontal lobe engagement. Photobiomodulation to improve sleep quality. Right? It's hard to know what else to really recommend when it's kind of this rather monomorphic presentation. But with the audiovisual entrainment, you could potentially give him 9 hertz. Just talking with Dave, and he mentioned that sometimes if you give the person the frequency that their brain is making, then they can sleep better. So you might try that. So this was a brief one, very sleepy EEG, and I would say general recommendations given lack of focal features and, follow-up assessment recommended once sleep is addressed. So there you have it. Thanks for watching Trace Neuroanalytics. I will remind you that no medical advice is given, and I look forward to hearing from James what it is that you end up doing with his client and how he responds to the training and what training you end up finding effective. Once again, thanks for watching. My name is Nikki. This is Trace Neuroanalytics, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.